recently got access to Wyldheart's alpha, and I genuinely don't understand how a team this small built something so ambitious. What's up, you beautiful beasts? To show you what I mean by ambitious, we have to start where every epic journey begins: character creation. But quickly, just listen to this main menu music. If it doesn't get you ready for some fantasy shenanigans, I don't know what will. Making a character in Wyldheart is fantastically simple, so much so that it's actually refreshing. You won't be twiddling tiny percentages of brow height or nostril flaredness. Instead, you pick between 4 body types per gender per race, and then when you're happy, you pick a haircut, eye color, brows, beard, markings, all the good stuff an attractive character needs. While you won't be able to dive the depths of full customization akin to, say, Dark Souls, where you're recreating Shrek and handsome Squidward, you'll not be losing hours in character creation just to make something aesthetically pleasing enough that you don't want to remake it as soon as you beat the tutorial, which we've all done. I played through the hour or so of gameplay in the vertical slice I was given twice. Once with a free folk called Bear, and another with a Grimhorn muscle mommy I called Ogtha. I hope her and her husband are doing well. Now, I've got to admit, I have a bit of a habit about getting excited for games that turn out to be a bit of a misfire. I was all in on the tragedy that was Anthem and completely tripped up by the rug pull that was the day before, and my community has never let me forget it. So, going into another game I'm incredibly excited for had me getting a bit anxious. Both characters began their ventures by being tossed into the Slimelords' lair and were tasked with escaping. Bear began with a giant club and some deer meat, while Ogtha had a sickle, water, and some carrots, all a growing Grimhorn needs. And a little cool thing that I noticed is their equipment is updated on their backpack depending what you've got. Anyway, both snatched a handful of torches and began their descent into the slimy bowels. We're going to start with Ogtha's journey. First, she had a far tougher time of things. Picking through the slime-covered walls, she was able to find a mace and a shield, giving her more survivability than her gardener's robes before we started clubbing our way through some undead and a demented cultist. We then supped at some of their green Kool-Aid, and while I don't think it was apple, it was pretty refreshing. I got my first skill point here and immediately dumped it into extra health due to the fear of dying alone. However, sadly, that didn't change what happened next. First off, I stumbled into a trap I hadn't noticed, pelting me with acid arrows, so I retreated only to be accosted by a trio who were clearly pissed off I'd disturbed their evening rituals as they proceeded to beat the shit out of me. Thankfully, Ogtha was not done for yet. Rallying, she proceeded to put her mace to good use and smash the 3 into mere stains on the walls before stealing their wallets and pressing onwards. One thing worth noting for this vertical slice of gameplay they've given me is that they've drastically upped the amount of loot in this area to get a taste of what sort of equipment we can find, so it didn't take long before I had my pick of a small armory. I was also told that a lot of the equipment is subject to change, so I didn't really pay much attention to the item stats besides damage and protection, and just focused on how the game played. But it did raise some questions for later. Eventually, I found my way to the threshold of the Slimelords' lair and a little puzzle which had originally stumped me. 3 altars of 3 colors which needed items to open the path. At first, I tried skulls, which gave me nothing, and I genuinely got a touch confused until I recalled colourful pieces of hard slime I'd picked up that just so happened to be 3 different colours, and the way opened. I loved this puzzle. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't exactly mind-boggling, but it was enough to make me pause for thought, and I appreciate when games do that besides just get key, use key. Crossing into the Slimelord's lair, I was able to put my skills to the test, tricking his minions into a corridor and introducing them to my mace, before making short work of the boss proper with a few lit braziers, because nothing says fuck off like burning metal to the face. It's also a good example of how there are multiple ways to beat the enemies in this game, showing that paying attention to your surroundings is paramount, just like in tabletop roleplay games. Ogfa was finally free. Basking in the sunlight, she took a few deep breaths of fresh air and began her quest. And that's where the vertical slice ended, or at least where I ended it, as I'm being very careful about just how deep I dive into this game during the alpha slice, with the beta being just around the corner. My main 3 questions were: how did the combat feel? How did my PC handle it? And is the main gameplay loop satisfying? And in just an hour, I got answers to all 3 of these questions, but I had to be thorough. Before I move on to Bear's playthrough and answering the questions, I need you to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on all my other content for Wyldheart and beyond. Now onto Bear. His playthrough went far differently. Confident now in my abilities, I strode into the darkness with club in hand and swatted every enemy that came at me. I explored every nook and cranny before eventually stumbling into a room containing something Ogfa had missed entirely: a giant ogre. This fight was a bit more challenging than the others, mostly because of getting past his shield, but eventually I bested him, and in his dying breath, he told me the hammer is now mine. But what hammer? He hadn't dropped a hammer. It took me a moment, but just behind him was a slime-covered doorway which, after clearing, led to a flaming skull warhammer, which I proceeded to then use to beat the ever-living shit out of anything that wandered into my eyeline. Not only did it make a mess of enemies with serious damage, but it also set them alight. And this felt epic. But a bit too epic for a starter dungeon. Either way, armed with this literal warhead of a hammer, I carved my way through the Slimelords minions and then him before reaching freedom and getting some well-earned sleep at a nearby campfire. While this relic of a weapon was overpowered, it was amazing to see what the potential endgame plans are for the equipment. I can only imagine where they'll take it. The slice we're given gives us a little bit further into the world, allowing us to explore a few hexagons further and the town of Wyldheart, all of which feel like their own little worlds full of bits to find, such as random quests like this broken down merchant caravan or the lair of a beast I didn't have the balls to explore. This tiny segment of a journey ends in Wyldheart, where you learn the bigger picture and are given vague hints to what else might be in store for you, but I'll save that for another time. All in all, I went into this alpha with trepidation. Was this to be another egg on my face to add to the growing collection? Thankfully, I think my pride will avoid another gut punch. The little bit I got to play wasn't perfect by any means, but that's the idea of an alpha. You get a few pieces of the puzzle and the picture on the box and get to see a slight glimpse at what it's all working towards. Going back to my questions from earlier, the game ran great on my system, and I'll leave my specs down in the description. Combat felt like a really great start. Blocks, parries, and ripostes feed into an active system that makes you consider your equipment, what kind of enemies you're against, and where you're fighting them. It's by no means finished or polished, but we are in the alpha. It's light on feedback in some areas, and there's a lot of iffy balancing, but I didn't expect to come in and have everything feature complete at this point. It was enough to be serviceable to see the grander design. The most important question though, in my opinion, is the loop interesting? And I can say, at least after the brief moment I played, yes, I think it is. I felt the urge to discover, explore, and unearth as much as I could. The initial story setup felt like a standard yet solid D&D plot setup, leading to an interesting adventure which I need to figure out rather than just following the waypoint. The dungeon was just long enough to sink my teeth into without being so long that it felt like a slog, but I can also see room for them to go bigger, so much bigger. With the puzzles, bosses, traps, and so forth, they really have a perfect playground to make some memorable gameplay. While some will be glad to know that this was an enjoyable experience solo, I'm excited to try it with friends even more so. I am kinda curious how they'll balance things based on party size. But I can't sit here and glaze this game indefinitely. That's just not fair. I didn't really get to explore the skill trees, and the balancing was, as I said, kind of off. The stats of the equipment were placeholders, so in terms of progression and how the game will evolve from what is effectively the tutorial is something I'll need to figure out when the beta comes around. It also perhaps wasn't the purest experience due to how much loot I found. While it gave me a good way of seeing how melee combat played out no matter what I used, I'm also a little unsure about where I land when it comes to everyone being able to use everything straight out of character creation, but I need to put some more thought into that. I also didn't really get hands-on time with the crafting system, etc. It was all very placeholder at this moment in time, which again, I get. What I can say, however, is that I don't regret hitching my horse to this wagon. It's incredibly impressive that 10 devs in 4 years can produce something of this quality. I think, given the time, money, and feedback from us, the players, they might have something seriously impressive on their hands, which will make a perfect addition to the library of RPG lovers, D&D critters, and dice throwers. Their Kickstarter ends in 3 days as of recording this video. If you've liked what you've seen, I suggest heading to back it, or you can wishlist it on Steam. Links for both are also in the description. So, what do you think? Are you itching to get your hands on it, or a little undecided still? Am I right to be hyped, or as always, am I full of shit? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, be sure to like and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.
Though it tastes fine, I can only drink a couple cause it feels like a lie.